Hi, welcome back to my channel. My name is Allie. I'm finally back from my trip and I'm ready to say good effing bye to 2023. To be honest, this was a pretty shitty reading year, mostly because last year was so iconic. I had 8 all-time favorite books. These, oh my god. I feel like these changed my DNA, and I also had like a handful of other 5 stars. This year, I only have 7 5 stars, and only a couple of those are like all-time favorites, so yeah, I'm here to talk about all the superlatives. I'm going to be very brief on the books that I didn't like, mostly because I want to move on with my life. But I will have chapters down below so that you can go to the section you're most intrigued by. And yeah, I think I'll start off with all of my 2 and 1 stars, which are these books here. They're all romance, which kind of bummed me out at first, but actually it's kind of a good thing. Well, not a great thing. I notice that if I don't like a book, I usually DNF it, although the majority of romances I see through to the end because I'm engaged enough to want to finish, and I think that's great. My lowest of these is Get in My Swamp, which is a Shrek smut retelling, and I think it's the only 1 star I've ever given. Objectively, it was not a great book, okay? But I had so much fun reading this that it almost feels weird to give it a 1 star because I read it with my friends on a live sprint. So surprisingly, even though it's the lowest rated book, it's not my least favorite book. I think the ones that I had the least amount of fun reading was either Freeing Luca or My Roommate is a Vampire. I think both of these were a struggle to finish, and I was rolling my eyes and groaning, and like it felt like homework or something. I really didn't enjoy these 2. I definitely see where you could. I get it. It just wasn't for me. Obviously, there's a lot of mafia romance on these lower rated books, and that is because I was overcome with the deepest desire to read all the mafia romance I could get my hands on, and I didn't care if it was good or not. I do have today my favorite mafia romance that I read this year, which is funny because I think I only gave it a 3.5, but it's the Mattis Obsession by Danielle Laurie. This one, it has its faults, okay? I understand that. The back and forth goes on a little too long. There's hardly any plot in here, but my god, the chemistry between these 2 characters was immaculate. This romance is between this cop who is sort of like in the mafia. He does them favors and stuff. And this woman who's sort of like this hot mess. She's always doing drugs. She's always drinking. She's married to this really old, awful dude. And she's just waiting for him to die so that she can be done. These 2 have a history with each other, but it's not exactly a second chance romance. It's hard to explain. It's mostly just sexy. But there is like a fun hidden identity in here, which I thought was really cool. Unfortunately, I did continue the series, and we're gonna move on to the most disappointing books that I read this year, starting off with The Darkest Temptation, which is the next book in the Maid series. And this one had such high hopes because it is like a kidnapping story, which yes, if you don't read like dark romance, that sounds fucked up, and it is, but also like it's hot, okay? I can't explain it. This one though, it was really, there's nothing going on, and even though that one had no plot, the one that I really enjoyed, this one didn't have the chemistry to back it up, and so I was just like slogging through this. Then we have The Insatiable Volt Sisters. This was the biggest disappointment because this was a 5-star prediction. I was so sure I was going to be obsessed with this book, which doesn't make sense. I've never read this author before, and I haven't really heard anyone's reviews on it. It was just, I had a feeling. And a lot of the time, my 5-star predictions end up being true, so this was a bummer. I guess it was just slow, but then in other parts it was so fast. There was hardly any character development except for maybe one of the characters. There were random ass characters in here that were just sprinkled in as like forced romances, forced side plot. I don't even understand what the purpose of them was. And so just the confusion I had, because the concept of this book is pretty cool, but it just like there was no foundation to enjoy it on. I don't know how to explain that, but this was a bummer. And then we have Once Upon a Broken Heart. I couldn't even find my copy because I probably threw it in the back here somewhere, and it's just like, I'm trying to forget it, okay? This one I had really high hopes for because I had seen so many rave reviews, and it just wasn't my thing. I understand why people like it, but the plot, it moves so fucking quickly that I couldn't really grasp onto the main character, and I feel like a YA fantasy romance, which is what this was. Again, I'm not going into much detail on these because I feel a little bad, but I feel like a YA fantasy romance, you need to really love the main character or love the romance. I see potential for the romance, and I do have the second book, but I really wish I had felt closer to this main character, and I wish that things could have slowed down and simmered a little bit more. Okay, let's move on to the weirdest book that I read this year. Last year, it was The DeLorean, which was weird and disturbing. This year, it's Organ Meats. Very, very weird, a little disturbing, not as fucked up as The DeLorean, thank God. But it's interesting that the weirdest books that I read end up being like 3 stars, because I am one of those bitches who's like,
I like weird shit.
But I guess there's a limit. The synopsis on the back is about two best friends who find out that they come from a long line of woman-headed dogs and dog-headed women. I don't know. And one of them ends up, what does it say? Sinking into a dream world that the other one has to rescue them from. Did that happen in this book? I don't even know. This book was literally surreal. I think it was a piece of surrealist fiction, and it was so fucking nutso and all over the place, which was, yes, beautiful, but I could not grip onto anything. I had no idea what was going on. I couldn't even start to fathom what was going on because I had no sense of reality, which is at times really fun, but after a while, it's like, it made me feel like I really wanted to be friends with these weird, emo girls, and they just wouldn't let me sit at their table. That's what this book felt like, which was, yes, sometimes fun, but mostly just sad. Okay, on to my most surprising. We have Heir of Fire by Sarah J. Maas. This is the third book in the Throne of Glass series, not including the prequel stories. And this was most surprising because I had enjoyed Throne of Glass and whatever the second book was, and the prequel book, Assassin's Blade, but there were parts of it that kind of, I don't know if they bored me or annoyed me, or there was just something missing that made me think like, oh, I love this series. And this book is like, oh my god. I don't want to give anything away in case you haven't read this series, but the series follows this young woman named Selena Sardathian. She is an assassin and she now has to work with the king, blah, 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 blah. This one kind of steps outside of what we were going with the last 3 to 4 books. Our character is in a new environment. There are a lot of new characters in here, which at first I was kind of grumbly about, but I ended up absolutely loving them. It's almost like short stories in this one. We follow a few different plots and characters and settings, and my absolute favorite one was Manon, who is sort of a witch, and they ride, what are they called? They're not dragons. They're like wyverns. I don't know what they look like, but in my head, they're like creepy bat dragons. I don't know. I absolutely fell in love with her. There was a big How to Train Your Dragon sort of montage feeling to this book, and I absolutely ate it up. But Selena's story was great too. The ending was really big and epic feeling, and the anticipation after finishing this and wanting all the people to get together for the next book was such a great feeling. So that was a big surprise at how much I enjoyed this, especially compared to the other books in the series. Speaking of dragons, I, like everyone else, read Fourth Wing this year, and it was surprising because this is the weirdest mix of emotions I've had while reading a book where I don't love the writing. I think it's really cringe. It feels like a lot of other things I've read before. I didn't really care for the romance all that much, but I ate this fucking up. The drive to read this in the first half especially, where you knew that the main character had all of these challenges that she had to get through, that is the part that I absolutely was like, I can't stop reading this. I loved that feeling. In this book, all the dragon riders have to choose a dragon or have a dragon choose them, and to find out who everyone ends up with their dragons, and they have magic powers too, so to find out what everyone's powers is. It was just really anticipatory. Throughout the whole book, there were things to look forward to, and so it really helped drive your intrigue throughout the book, and I thought it was pretty impressive. Usually I like writing over plot, character over plot, anything over plot, and this was the biggest exception to that rule. Next biggest surprise was Malibu Rising by Taylor Jenkins Reid. When I chose this with my TBR game, I was so disappointed because I was like, oh, I've had this on my shelf forever and I don't want to read it because I had never seen a really rave review about it, and also it follows famous people, so I was like, oh, I don't think it's gonna be great. I feel like it's gonna be 3 stars, blah blah blah. I felt so connected to these characters, especially in the first half of the book. It's like this family drama, and my god, the pain that this woman makes you feel, but also it's funny, it's heartwarming. It's like, god damn, how does she do it? I cried while I read this. I laughed. I didn't love the second half, which is why I probably only gave it a 4. But yeah, I was very surprised and very happy to read this one. Next is Every Summer After by Carly Fortune. This is a romance. It takes place during a summer. There are 2 timelines, back when the main characters are teenagers and then when they're grown up, so it's a second chance romance. The thing that's so surprising about this is that I already knew what the plot twist was, the big reveal, the third act conflict, because I watched a spoiler video. I did bring this on vacation this past summer and I couldn't put it down. I had so much fun. The drama really gave me everything I wanted, but I really enjoyed this author's writing as well. So I don't know, I had a great time with this. Then The Cruel Prince. I read this during a fantasy, like YA fantasy romance reading vlog, and out of all of the books that I read for that, this was definitely my favorite, and I think that's helped me be pleasantly surprised because I kind of had some low expectations based on some of the other books that I had read, but turns out I fucking love this. This is about a human who lives in a fae world, and I was not expecting how grand this fae world was. I was thinking it was going to be like ACOTAR where they have these sexy fairies and that's it, but there are so many details in here, so many creatures. It's more dangerous than I thought it was going to be, and I also really liked our main character who was angry in an immature way, but it wasn't like infuriating. It's kind of a hard line to toe for me for when like especially a YA character is kind of being bitchy or like angry or angsty, but I felt the pure anger in, what was her name? Jude. And I really, really love to see it. There are some cringy things in here, especially in the beginning. I think there are elements in it that you would expect in a YA fantasy romance that I kind of get frustrated by, but even that and our main character sort of being a little immature, I still ate this up. And then we have Daisy Hates. This is the second book in the Magnolia Parks series, and it sort of follows not entirely different characters because it's in the same universe, and it's actually, I think, in the same timeline, which is pretty interesting as Magnolia Parks. The biggest difference though is that obviously we don't have Magnolia Parks, the character's point of view in here. We have Daisy, and I like Daisy so much better than I like Magnolia Parks. Oh my god, this girl drove me absolutely insane. For those that haven't read this, these are contemporary, they're not exactly romances, they're sort of drama, sort of in the vein of Gossip Girl where there's a lot of different relationships happening. They're in their early 20s. Actually, I think they might be in their mid 20s, which makes them even that more insufferable. But there's a lot of toxicity in here. There's no really good character. They're all kind of infuriating, which is pretty fascinating for me. I think the reason I was so pleasantly surprised about Daisy's book is because Daisy is in a much more high stakes sort of life. Her brother is in a gang. He's sort of in the mafia. He like steals and sells works of art and guns and stuff like that. So she's had her life threatened multiple times. She's dealt with a lot of death in her life. She's trained in like Krav Maga. She's not afraid to beat someone up, but she's also very feminine. So you get a little bit of danger here, higher stakes, but also you know that Daisy's been through it. And so some of the bullshit that she pulls is a little bit more understandable, or maybe I'm just more empathetic towards her. I don't know what that says about me, but this is the book that sort of triggered my mafia romance addiction, even though this isn't a mafia romance book. I think I still ended up giving it like a 3.5 at the end of the day because it's so fucking infuriating to read about toxic romances. But yes, very pleasantly surprised about this one. I'm ready to talk about my 5-star reads and I'm going to rank them. So coming in at number 7 is The Princess and the Grilled Cheese Sandwich, and this is a graphic novel. This gave me all of the emotions. I was tearing up, I was laughing, I was giggling. I have to thank Kristen from Kristen Craves Books because she raved about this book and I was like, I'll try it out. Kristen, thank you so much. This is a story, it's sort of historical, but then also there's like a Game Boy Switch in here. Game Boy Switch, Nintendo Switch. So it kind of plays around with the historic aspect. But anyway, our main character's name is Lady Camembert, and all of the characters, the town, the stores, they're all cheese related, which is just, it was one of the best things to read. Anyway, Lady Camembert's father is getting ill and he convinces her to pretend to be his son so that when her father passes, she can inherit this land because, you know, misogyny. So her father passes, she gets this land, she's passing as a man, and she ends up befriending the princess of this kingdom, I guess. This is Princess Bree, and Lady Camembert falls deeply and madly in love with Princess Bree. They have a friendship, but it seems kind of impossible because she's not being honest about who she really is. And so there's a lot of drama that ensues, and it's just so good. It has all those feelings of like having a crush, which it just, I love that. But again, there's humor, there's warm-heartedness, and then there's a little bit at the end, the author talking about how she wrote this for her and her wife, and it sent me Okay, number 6 is Rouge by Mona Awad. I had such a fun time reading this. It took me a minute to kind of get into it, but this turned weird very quickly, which I love. The best and my favorite part of Bunny by Mona Awad was definitely the spiraling of just craziness, and I feel like I got a lot of that in here. Let me tell you what this book is about. So our main character's name is Belle, and she has a weird relationship with her mother, and we are opening this book at her mother's funeral. Belle is now an adult. She's back in California. She's obsessed with skincare, like obsessed. And a couple nights go by, she ends up going to this spa that her mother used to go to, and shit gets crazy pretty quickly. I honestly can't really tell you anything more except that it's based on Eyes Wide Shut and like a gothic fairy tale vibe. There's a mirror involved. There's a villain who it's the funniest thing ever, I gotta tell you. I laughed so much in this book, much more than I was anticipating. And the scenes where Belle was in her mother's dress shop and things were like surreal, those were my favorite parts ever. With the mannequins, if you know what I'm talking about, then you know what I'm talking about. I also liked how Mona played with words in here because our main character and also just the narration of this book kept mixing up different words. And at first, our main character is correcting herself and she's like, oh, I actually meant this. But then as this book spirals out of control, she stops correcting the language and it's revealing certain things, and it's just, it was just so fun. I know a lot of people didn't absolutely love this one like I did, and you know what, I do have to say that although I love the out of control, like spiraling down the rabbit hole, the story itself, although like some moments really hit for me, I didn't feel totally gripped by the emotion in this, if that makes any sense. But the weirdness factor and the surrealism was the perfect amount of messy and weird and out of control, and I loved it. Coming in at number 5 is Megan Nolan's Acts of Desperation. This is about a young woman who's just going through it. She is in a toxic relationship, but it's not a romance at all. In fact, it's supremely depressing. The character's pretty unlikable by the end of it, but I just got so much out of this, so many good quotes. It was very beautifully written. But shit like this will just never get old for me, is how we as humans deal with pain and how we take that out on other people, but also how we take it out on ourselves. It just gave me a lot to think about. I was crying while I was reading this. There were some parts of this that I deeply related to, and then there were lots of parts of this where I was like, what? What are you doing? Stop it. And it was sad. The chapters are relatively short and I really flew through this. I think I read it in one sitting while I was very sick. So the readability, the beautification of it, the messiness, the drama, I just ate it up. Guys, we have my first ever, I'm pretty sure, 5-star romance. This is my 4th favorite book of the year, okay? And I didn't see it coming. This is probably my biggest surprise, actually. And you know what? I don't even want to reread it because I'm scared I won't have the same feelings that I did when I was reading it. I think this was actually my favorite vlog that I ever did. I did it during the September series where I was uploading a video every single day. And the energy I had in that, I think I was like a little manic that day. I just had such a blast reading this and vlogging it and talking to my camera about it. And this is so surprising as well because there are a lot of things in here that I typically dislike or like don't find interesting in a romance or even avoid entirely. This is a second chance romance between two characters whose names I forget. They're both involved in the wedding planning, I guess, industry. She is a wedding planner, so she plans all that stuff. And he owns a flower shop and he's like a flower artist or whatever it's called. I don't know. They haven't worked together in a long time, but she has this really huge opportunity. And so she goes to him because she knows he's the best and they have to work together again. It is a back and forth point of view and also timeline. All the past timeline is in his point of view and all the present timeline is in her point of view. You find out what went wrong before. You see them fall in love oh my God. I gotta tell you, this is one of the simpiest men I've read in a while and I ate it up. I love a good simp. And I think this is one of the only books where I sort of like the dude character more than the girl character. I also love a friends with benefits to lovers story, and that's sort of what happens in here. There's a lot of tropes in here. Some of the things I wasn't excited for, I don't like weddings in books. I really just could not care less and I find it kind of annoying. Didn't matter in here. Our main girl, she has a really bitchy old boss and it's like this stressful situation. Usually I try to avoid that in a romance. This was an exception. I think there were a few more things like that where in the vlog I was like, oh, I don't typically like that. And then a few chapters later I was like, oh my God, I love this. Again, I'm scared to reread it. Also, I think this was fan fiction. Like, how surprising is that? Ooh, this was so fun. Coming in at number 3 is A Visit from the Goon Squad. This has been sitting on my shelves for a while because it was talking about how it's about the music industry, and that's a big fat lie. It's really not. There are a couple characters in here that work in the music industry, but they don't even really talk about it all that much. What I didn't know is that this is sort of short stories, and the characters are somewhat connected. You go throughout time in a very non-linear way, so sometimes you'll see a character again, and it's very fascinating. No one in here is really all that likable. There's not really any happy endings. I mean, I guess some of them. This was just a very deeply depressing story, and it wasn't sad. It was just life can sometimes just suck kind of book. And for some reason, my bitter soul gravitates and just clutches those kinds of stories. There was also some interesting formats to this. There was an entire story that was told in PowerPoint presentation. Like, what? Look at this. This was such a wild ride, and it was fun seeing how everyone connected. I think the biggest part, obviously, was just how beautifully this was written. I can't believe I didn't annotate it. What the fuck? All the men in here sucked. My thoughts are all over the place right now, I'm sorry. It made me laugh, it made me cry, it made me cringe. It had all the emotions in here, and it was just, I loved it so much. Coming in at number 2, oh my gosh, this was the first book I read in 2023. And I still love it so much. Emily Wilde's Encyclopedia of Fairies. And you know what? It's getting all the attention it deserves right now because I see it on so many people's favorites right now. And it's just like, yes! This is a historical fantasy, and I don't want to say romance because it's not all that romancy, but that was one of the best parts of it. So yeah, I guess it's a historical fantasy romance, and it's also very cozy. Our main character's name is Emily Wilde, obviously. She is a very sort of awkward, not people person. She's academic, and she's gone to this town, I think, what is it, in the Netherlands? She is studying the folk, which are fairies, and she has an encyclopedia that she's writing. And you know what's just so funny is that there are little footnotes in here, which is like exactly what I would expect from Emily. She's very by the book type A, which is one of my favorite types of characters to read. She's having a hard time winning over this town and getting help to find out some more things to study. And in comes her academic rival. His name is Bamblebee. I always call him Bartleby. Wendell Bamblebee. They have worked together for a while. He gets on her ever-loving nerves. He's very charismatic. She has suspicions about his identity, which is really fun to read about. And at first you can't really tell if he actually likes her and wants to be her friend or if he's trying to weasel into her work. I don't know, just the dynamic between these two was so great. Bamblebee is so iconic, but so is Emily. They also have a little sidekick dog named, oh, what was his name? Shadow, I think. This definitely gave me my love for like fairy lore. And actually in here, there are some individual stories of different fairies. And I thought that part was so cool because it just stopped being the narration of the plot and just gave us stories. And storytelling within a story is one of my absolutely favorite things. Oh, I feel like I need to catch my breath. I'm getting too excited about all these books, my God. I think the ending did spiral out of control a little bit, but I'm so excited to continue on with Emily. I loved all of the little characters. I'm sad to see probably a couple of the characters go. Poe was a little fairy dude, and I'm gonna miss him. I'm gonna miss him so much. Okay, I need to stop talking or I'm gonna never shut up. Coming in at number 1, and definitely an all-time favorite from here on out, this like changed my life. It feels like I'm being so dramatic. Luster by Raven Leilani. Oh my God, I can't even talk about this book. This is about a young woman who is struggling. And this story really revolves around the situation and relationships that she ends up having with this family. She enters into a sort of relationship with a dude in an open marriage. So obviously the wife and him both, you know what's going on. And just the awkwardness of that relationship and just of this whole book is hilarious. I laughed so much while reading this. I also had some horrible news and like really something disappointing happen in the middle of reading this, and it just really fucking like it was there for me. This was like read at the perfect time. And then the second half of the book, you find out more about this family, and our main character Edie, her relationship kind of grows. Oh my God, my camera's about to die. Okay, fuck it. I'm gonna film the rest of this on my iPhone because I want to be done with 2023. As I was saying, this goes from being really awkward and funny and a little hints of sadness into this character to just being completely depressing. But there are also some really surprisingly heartwarming things in here. Overall, this was written so supremely well, and that it gave me all of the emotions, but also made me underline like every other fucking sentence. Like, I'm pretty sure some of this changed my life. This is definitely a book where I could reread it over and over and over and over and still have it like punch me in the fucking gut. Oh God. So definitely an all-time favorite now. And I think this is Raven Leilani's only book that she's written, and I'm frothing at the mouth for her to publish another book. Okay, there's one more section here because I completely forgot about a few books. I have some honorable mentions. And first, I have honorable chapters of books because some of these chapters have stuck with me even though I didn't love the book. For one, we have Knock Knock Open Wide. The first chapter of this book was like 12 fucking stars. It was so creepy. It was very, very disturbing. It was so mysterious and confusing, and oh my God. There was a lot of promise of like family drama, and this was just amazing. Only read this if you want to be disturbed a little bit because it's pretty fucked up. This whole book is about now that I've read the whole book, it's kind of hard for me to say what it's about without spoiling it completely, but there is a jump in time. There's a murder that happens in the past in the first chapter, and it's very infamous in this town. And then in the present timeline, we meet the daughter of who this happened to, and we get like her life in college and her relationship with this girl, but you also find out more about what happens. I will tell you that there's a creepy children's show and a puppet. I'm kind of losing the rest of the plot, but there are rings that sort of control people. There's a lot going on in here, but that first chapter was so memorable and so disturbing, and it's sitting inside of me forever, and I loved it. Then we have How to Sell a Haunted House. I can't find my copy right now. This is, there's also puppets in this story, which is so funny because that's my favorite part in this. This story is about a pair of grown siblings. Their parents passed away and they need to sell this house. They're bickering. They have had issues with each other for many years. And we find out more about their past, about their parents, and about their parents' possessions, which seem to be haunting everything. In particular, there's this puppet named Pumpkin, and what an icon, what a legend. I love him. But he's also probably the scariest thing and the goofiest thing I've ever read. There is a particular chapter in here where we are in the brother's point of view, and he's talking about his time with a group of puppeteer friends, and the insanity that happens in this chapter was iconic and so deeply memorable, and it has allowed me, even though I rated this maybe 3 stars, to never forget this story. There's also a particular chapter like, you're stacked on all my books right now, so I can't pull it back out. In A Visit from the Goon Squad, and I think it's called Safari. I'm pretty sure it's chapter 4, and it was so good because there were short stories within this short story. We get so many different characters. It talks a lot about animals and what is it, like anthropology, like humans as animals, but there's also animals in the story. There's a lot of different relationships going on, but it made me start bawling because the way that this chapter and this whole book is written is that you'll get a character, like there's this little boy, and you'll see him in this story as a little boy, but then there are hints as to his future and like things that go on with him in a very casual way, and something devastating is just said off the cuff, and it made me absolutely lose it. I think the story itself is about a family. It's like a dad, his 2 kids, and his girlfriend, and they go somewhere on a safari. They're on like a vacation, and so you kind of see what's going on in each of these people's heads and their motivations, their main focus in their lives, their problems, but also the way they think. And it was just so psychologically interesting that it was just so good. Then we have Hellbent, which, yes, has one of my favorite chapters that I've read. I remember saying that, but now that I'm thinking about it, like, I can't remember totally. So I'm gonna just put this as an honorable mention. This is the second book in the Ninth House series. I actually think it's called something else, but whatever. We are following this girl named Galaxy. Everyone calls her Alex. She goes to Yale, and there are ghosts and paranormal things happening, and she is sort of in charge of, I don't know, she's doing ghost shit. This book, I think I might have liked it even more than Ninth House. I can't tell. Lee Bardugo just does an excellent job of, what is it called? Atmosphere. It just feels so fall, so cemetery, so brick building. I can't even describe it other than that. It has such good imagery, such good detail. I will read anything in the series, even though like at the end of this, I was like, I'm not really interested in the plot here. I want the atmosphere, I want these relationships. And then I think it was chapter 26 that I found so interesting because it was sort of a spiral out of control and we were jumping into different people's stories and maybe even subconscious. It was very complicated. This book also had a little bit of sexual tension and I loved it. I don't want to give anything away because again, it's like a sequel, but yeah. Honorable mention. Then another honorable mention is my year of rest and relaxation. This one was kind of a surprise too because I didn't mean to listen to this whole book in one sitting, but that's what happened. I was just gonna listen to a couple chapters to see if I wanted to purchase it and I couldn't stop it. This is a story about a young woman who lives in New York City and she is a piece of work, let me tell you. She's a bad friend, she's not a very likable person, and she has made a pact with herself that she is going to spend a year unconscious and drugged out of her mind. She finds this nurse practitioner that will give her these crazy prescriptions. It was hilarious to read. She ends up like blacking out and then waking up like wearing fur coats that she doesn't remember buying. And it gets insane. And there was like a sort of tension in this book, even though nothing was really happening because it happens around September of 2001 in New York City. And so you don't know if this is like a 9/11 book or not. I'm not going to tell you either way, but just knowing where the setting and time frame of this book is, it sort of made the tension like amp up. I think that was a really interesting way to add anticipation to a book where like, what is even happening in this book? I don't even know, but obviously it's written really well because Tessa Moshfegh is iconic. She puts so much detail into her books, like what is the other book I read? Death in Her Hands, which looks very good with my sweater. But this has the added aspect of a bitchy, rich bitch. And I sort of, even though I sort of hated this character, it made me more intrigued to read about because I don't know why. I should probably examine that. And my final honorable mention is Feed Them Silence by Lee Mandello. My voice is like going away. I'm not crying or about to cry, I promise. This is a novella and it's science fiction. I feel like it's categorized as horror, but I don't agree. This one is about a doctor who makes up this technology that she can see what's happening in this wolf. And she's always been obsessed with wolves and with being in a pack, which, you know, same. And so there's a moral dilemma that's happening, whether this is like, you know, an ethical thing to do. I forget what the difference of morality and moral and ethics, I get confused about that, so I'm sorry if I use those words wrong. So there's all this science and work stuff happening, and she's getting closer and closer to this one wolf that she's observing, and I feel like I so easily, in this very short amount of pages, also got really connected to this wolf, which obviously is a testament to how well this is written, but also to the main character, the doctor, because at the same time, she's having these marital struggles with her wife, and it was just, it was kind of sad to see, you know, this marriage sort of crumbling. Our doctor is very obsessed with her work and it is definitely affecting her marriage. And so yeah, there's a lot of drama. It's sort of sad, but also it's crazy how close I got to these characters in just 100-something pages. I also really love books that talk about animals, if they can also make a parallel or I guess drag humans into being animals, because you know we are. I'm really fascinated by that. Okay, I think I'm finally done. I was dreading doing this because I'm not good at actually describing like this amount of books at once. It's overwhelming to me. I feel like I don't do a great job explaining things, but hopefully you understood what I was talking about. I feel like a lot of these books most people have read, and I obviously recommend my 5-star reads and my honorable mentions. Please let me know what your top 3 books of the year is down below. I would love to know. I'm really hoping for a better reading year in 2024, but actually going over this, it reminded me that I did read some really great books. But you know what? There's always room for improvement. So 2024, it's gonna be a 5-star year. I can just feel it.
Sure, Jan.
All right, y'all, I'm gonna go because I need to shut up. I'll see you later. Goodbye.